Welcome to Becoming a Bible Nerd. We are on John chapter 12, and so we are trekking through. This one starts with the opening of this chapter saying 6 days before the Passover. So already we're going to stop right here. John mentions the Passover several times in his gospel. This is going to be the last Passover that he talks about, and this is the Passover that Jesus will be crucified. So half of this book is going to be the last days of Christ. So we are down to his last 6 days, and the Passover is one of those Jewish festivals that were required by God. In fact, it was one of the 3 pilgrimage ones. Remember when we talked about the Feast of Tabernacles? This Pesach or Passover was one of the 3 pilgrimage ones where everyone was required to come to Jerusalem to celebrate. It's celebrated in the spring, usually around April. This year, or when I say this year, the next Passover in 2020 will be Wednesday, April 8th through Thursday, April 16th. So this is a feast that it's usually celebrated in the week. And it was celebrating the freedom from slavery in Egypt. There's a special meal attached to this festival. It's called a Seder, and it's usually celebrated on the first night, and each part of the meal has something that is symbolic of the night that they had to escape from Egypt. And so as the family eats the meal, they're also talking about the Exodus story, and this is how they celebrate and pass down these stories to their children. They're remembering. It is also a meal that was commanded by God that night because they had to get out quickly. Now, when I talk about getting out from the original Passover, I'm talking about back when Moses was in Egypt, and we know that there were 10 plagues that God brought on Egypt because the Pharaoh would not let the Hebrew people go. Well, this was the 10th and final plague where the Passover angel, the angel of the Lord, would come, and he would take the lives of all firstborn in Egypt, talking about animals and humans. But if the Israelites sacrificed a spotless lamb and marked their doorpost with the blood, then the angel of the Lord would pass over that house, and that house would be saved. So from that day forward, every firstborn son of Israel would belong to the Lord, and that son would have to be redeemed or bought back with a sacrifice. And so this was a yearly feast that was celebrated. And like I said, God would institute a meal that they would eat to remember, and spotless lambs were killed during the Passover to cover the sins of the people. And this was all a picture for the people that Jesus would be their spotless Passover lamb. And in fact, his death would be during Passover at the very time that the priest would be slaughtering the lambs. And so this is 6 days before this festival, and Jesus is at dinner with some of his friends. We know that Lazarus is there, and he has gained popularity because of this miraculous bringing back to life miracle that happened 4 days after his death. And we know that Martha is there serving them, and we know that he's at Simon the leper's house. He was a leper that was healed by Jesus, and we know that it's his house from Matthew and Mark's gospel. Well, in comes Mary, and she has a 12-ounce bottle of perfume, or nard. I think that's such a funny name for perfume. It doesn't sound pretty or girly at all. But a regular flask of perfume would be 1 ounce, and she is carrying 12 ounces. So this is extravagant. And it says in the IVP commentary that spikenard is an expensive fragrant oil from a plant in the mountains of northern India, and this amount would have cost about 1 year's wage. And it was common in this day to anoint a special guest with oil when they came into your home, but it was not common to anoint their feet. Their feet, usually just a little bowl of water would have been sufficient and supplied by the host. And so this whole occasion is going to be somewhat familiar to the people, but there's going to be some odd elements, including the extravagance of the actual oil, the fact that she's anointing his feet instead of his head, and the fact that she's using her hair to wipe his feet. All of this would have been sticking out to the people, and it was a sign of extravagance. I love that Dr. Constable talks about this in his commentary, and he says that real worship always costs the worshiper. It always involves sacrifice. And this is where we're going to stay today. We're going to talk about this all throughout this chapter, that when we come to truly worship God, it is going to cost us something, and it requires sacrifice. That's why Jesus told his disciples that unless a man takes up his cross and follows him, he won't be saved. So this is going to cost us time, money. It could cost some people friends. It might even require you to give up something that you love and replace it with time spent in serving God. Worshiping God is not only going to a church service and singing songs to him. We call that praise and worship, but worship is our life living in pursuit of God and pursuit of his kingdom, and that ultimately requires serving others. And so today, I just want us to ask ourselves, are we in our worship of God and living our lifestyle throughout the week, throughout the weekend as we enter church, are we giving God our best? Does he get our first? Or are we just consumers? Are we just taking in what he has to give? Or sometimes maybe we are giving a little, but he just gets our leftovers. And an example of this, something that we could talk about, is just even spending time in God's word. Are you intentionally, and whenever I'm just giving this as an example, I do not want there to be any legalism in it, like that you have to get up in the morning. I'm just giving this an example for something to think about. Are you living out your day where you get up and you rush through all the things that you have to accomplish for that day, and if you have time and energy at the end of the day, you'll crack open your book? That's not giving in our best to anyone or anything, especially not God. And a lot of times if we live our life that way, of course, we'll never have the time to do it. Or if we do, if we have enough discipline to actually open it up, we're so exhausted and we have so many things on our mind that we're actually just going through motions, but we're not seeking it in. Now, some of you are night owls, and this is a time where you can curl up and it's quiet and your kids are asleep and you really do absorb. I'm not talking to you guys. Like I said, this isn't a legalistic thing, but I think a lot of us can get caught up in doing our things first and then giving God our leftovers. That's all I'm asking, is for us to examine our hearts. An opposite example of this would be to set our alarms earlier than what we normally do to allow margin in our life. And we get up and we say, you know what, I'm not going to do anything without spending this 15 minutes or this 30 minutes or this 10 minutes where I just sit in the quiet before my day gets started and I think about the Lord and I open up the word and I read something and I really fully let it absorb. That would be giving God our best. Again, please understand that this is not a formula that you have to do. All I'm saying is to examine our hearts to see if we're giving God our best and our first. Okay, so this is what she does. Another thing that Dr. Constable says in this quote is, of course, she was misunderstood and criticized, but that usually is what happens when somebody gives their best to the Lord. So think about that. Whenever we do alter our lives and change our lives in a way that we are giving God our best, we're using our creative gifts and our skill set to devote to kingdom work, maybe volunteering at your church or doing things out in the community that are going to serve others. When we start living a life like that, we will be misunderstood and criticized. And all that is the enemy's way to discourage you and to try to distract you and wanting you to just fit in with the norm. He doesn't want us sticking out and doing anything that would bring other people to Christ. And so if he can discourage you and make you feel like there's something wrong with you, then he's going to do it. Don't let him win, though. And then this goes on and says that Judas has a thought about this extravagant gift. He ends up asking Jesus, why wasn't this fragrant oil sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? He didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but it was because he was a thief and he was in charge of the money bag and would steal part of it that was put in. Now, at first glance of reading this, my initial thought was, that's interesting to me that Judas is keeping the bag, because when you study the life of each disciple, Matthew was a chief tax collector. So he in his gospel, we know that he was very meticulous because he would write all these little details down. And being a chief tax collector, he would deal with money, but he was oversaw other tax collectors. And so to me, it would be natural that he would be the financier of Jesus's ministry. But Judas was. So maybe Judas even had a stronger gift in this area. So it was not given to Matthew and it was given to Judas. These are all just things that I'm thinking about as I'm reading. We don't know. It's just things that I wonder. But when we read this, we see that sometimes our gifts can lead to our downfall. And it's whenever we start using the things that God placed inside of us that we're good at to bring glory to ourselves instead of glory to him, that our hearts will harden and it changes us. And so actually the thing that was a gift from God, that God placed inside of us to bring glory to him, is actually something that will lead us astray. And Judas ends up stealing from Jesus's ministry because he was entrusted with this. And this could be anything in our lives. It could be our voice. Maybe you have a voice that can sing, or maybe you're very articulate with your words and you can communicate as a good teacher or preacher or any type of communicator. Maybe you have charm or creativity or administrative skills, or maybe you have outward beauty that draws people in and you can use that to tell people about Jesus and have influence over them. But anytime that we start focusing on our gifts to bring ourselves glory, it ends up hardening our hearts. And we'll look at this again at the end of the chapter. We're going to look at this in detail, and it really breaks your heart whenever you read what John says about it in his gospel. So then we know that there's a large crowd that comes to Bethany, and they want to see Jesus and they want to see Lazarus. So it says that the chief priest decided to kill Lazarus, but also because he was the reason that many Jews were deserting them and believing in Jesus. And I want us to talk again about that when our lives are lived by giving God our best and bringing people into the kingdom, then there is going to be an opposing force, the enemy, that is going to want to come against us to stop us and to destroy us. And Lazarus, just the fact that he was raised from the dead brought many people in to meet Jesus. And so the chief priest now doesn't want to just kill Jesus. He's throwing Lazarus in there too, because he's now a threat, because his life and his testimony is winning people to Jesus. And I will just say this, that if you lived a changed life, a resurrected life, the enemy will plot against you. Your life is impacting others and pointing people to Jesus, and you will get opposition. But we know who has the victory, and we know that we're children of God and that we do win. And so we got to just persevere. We got to run with endurance. We've got to lean on God, and he's going to protect us and he's going to see us through. So then we go on in chapter 12, and this next incident happens the next day. And we know that people are gathering for the Passover, and it's very common and customary for large crowds to gather in Jerusalem days before to welcome all the pilgrims that would be traveling in. And so this just seems so fun to me. Well, they do that on this day, and there's more of an expectancy and there's more of an excitement because Jesus has really gained popularity and notoriety. And now with the raising of someone from the dead, they come expecting. their hearts and their minds are already set on God's promises, that the salvation from slavery and bondage in Egypt, and God raising up a Moses to bring them out. And then they know that the prophecy is that there's another anointed one coming, and their minds and their hearts are wrapped around this, and they're expecting a warrior to come in and to overthrow the Roman government, and then to set up a throne. And they are so excited about this. So not only are they gathering to welcome in the pilgrims, they're waiting for Jesus to enter in the city. Now, something in this day that was so big was called a Roman triumph. And it was when a military warrior or a king had conquered something, he would ride into the city, and there would be this huge parade and celebration, and people there gathering. And the man that they were honoring would come in on a white horse. And so this is the mindset of the people. They are expecting Jesus, this warrior who's going to overthrow Rome, to come in, and he's the hero of the day. So they're gathering, and it says that they have palm branches to meet him. Now we know, because we've talked about the Feast of Tabernacles, that these palm branches, or lulavs, have become a political symbol of a fight against the Roman government. They were also used to celebrate in many of the festivities. And so they have their palm branches. And it was also a way for them to just pay homage to a ruler coming in. They would wave them. They're also, the word says in chapter 12, that they are saying, Hosanna, Lord save us. We've talked about this before. And they're chanting the Hallel. In fact, to quote it, it says around verse 13 that they took palm branches to go outside and meet him, and they kept shouting Hosanna, which means save us. And then they would say, who comes in the name of the Lord, the blessed one, the King of Israel. Now, we talked about before that they would chant the Hallel, that's Psalms 113 through 118 at a lot of these festivals. So that's what they're doing. This is actually Psalms 118, or a portion of that they are chanting. So they have this expectation, there's excitement, and Jesus rolls in on a donkey. Now, this is fulfilling prophecy in Zechariah 9:9, if you want to look that up. But also remember that the kings come in on a white horse during war. But Jesus is not coming in as a warrior at his first coming. He's coming in as a suffering servant to pay the price for the world's sins, not to just save Israel from Rome, but to save the world from their sin. He's also coming in to give an example of how he wants us to love others, and that's through serving. The donkey was a symbol of peace, and that is what he's communicating, that he's coming in as peace because he's working towards restoring all things for that perfect shalom at the end of the world. So he's riding in very humbled on a donkey, and the people were so confused. But the one thing that we do know in Revelation is that he's coming back the second time on a white horse, and that is going to be our warrior that comes back and defeats the enemy and defeats Satan and his army once and for all. So the crowds are swelling, and they see they are still they're celebrating. There's confusion. There's all these things going on, and we know that the Pharisees are plotting once again to kill him. It says in verse 20 that there's some Greeks or God-fearers that come up and ask Philip to meet Jesus. Now, God-fearer is a Gentile who hadn't completely done everything necessary to convert to Judaism, mostly through circumcision, but they were followers of God, and they would attend synagogue, but they didn't necessarily fully embrace the Jewish law or Torah. They could only enter into the courts of Gentiles. They weren't allowed to go any further past the courts of Gentiles in the temple. But this was common in their day, and so they go up to Philip and they ask Philip to take him to Jesus. Well, Philip evidently doesn't know how to handle this, so he goes to Andrew. And then Andrew, we know from chapter 1, is always bringing people to Jesus. And here we see him approaching Jesus because he's wanting to bring, once again, more people to Jesus. We don't know. This is where it stops in that discussion. But Jesus has an interesting discussion with his crowd at this time, and he's talking about his death, but they aren't picking that up. It's not clear because we get to read in hindsight, and we know that there's going to be a resurrection, but to them, they don't really follow what he's throwing down. But he ends up talking something that they're familiar with, which is farming, and he's talking about a grain of wheat and how that grain of wheat can't really do too much in and of itself, but if it dies and falls to the ground, well, then there's going to be a seed planted and a crop will come from it. And so what he's saying is that he has to die for there to be this abundance of a harvest of Christians coming to know the Lord. And so he gives them this talk, and he ends up going on to say, if you live for yourself, then you're going to lose your life. But if you set your mind on things that I want, then you're going to find life. And again, how do you do this? Well, he came as the perfect example to serve others. And so as we start going through this chapter and working our way through, this really is over and over again teaching us that we need to use the gifts that God's placed inside of us to serve others, to give God our best. I know that one of the examples I thought of just as I was reading through this was my grandmother. Even in her old age, loved to make gift baskets with these huge bows. She loved to shop and buy just little bitty things. And so she used her gifts to gather up things that hospice patients and their families would need. And she would make these beautiful baskets and bring it to them. She wasn't on staff at hospice, but that's just where she chose to go and to serve and to love on others. And so you can use your skill set for amazing things like this, just to touch other people's lives. The easiest way, some people, they just don't naturally know where to volunteer. My grandmother just had heart for that. She volunteered every place that she could find. Some people have a harder time just kind of figuring out what to do and where to serve. And the easiest place is in your local church. I'm sure that there's coffee that needs to be made. Kids ministry and nursery always needs workers. Trash needs to be picked up. Meals need to be made and sent. This is the perfect place for you to figure out where you can serve and to give God your best. Now remember, worship, this is a form of worship. It always comes at a sacrifice. So sometimes we might want to be on stage using our voice or playing our instrument, and sometimes the need is somewhere else. It might be to clean out a closet, or it might be to be with the crazy kids. And I joke about the kids, but just the best thing that we can do and to give God our best is to ask our leaders, where can we serve? Where is there a great need? And I promise you this, if you have a skill that is in an area that is not needed, if you are faithful where there is a need, God is always going to raise you up and allow you to serve where your giftings are. And so sometimes we just have to start where there's the need. Jesus goes on to say that his soul is troubled, but at the same time, because he's grieving, he knows what he's about to walk into, he still glorifies his Father's name. And that stuck out at me. But just to wrap this up, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. But I do want to mention one thing. Here in the chapter, Jesus is quoting from Isaiah, and he's talking about how there's going to be eyes that are blinded and hardened hearts. And he's talking about the Pharisees and the religious leaders at this. And this is something that I always wrestle with, exactly what that means when God hardens someone's heart. But what really got me is in verse 42. It says, nevertheless, many did believe in him, even amongst the rulers. So he's talking about the religious leaders. But because of the Pharisees, they didn't want to confess him because they didn't want to be banned from the synagogue. For they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. So there's some times that we can let our flesh get in the way of what God is calling us to do. And in this circumstance, God was calling these religious leaders to go out and lead other people and to follow God. But they knew that they would have been banned from the synagogue, and they knew that they would lose their position. And they would rather have their position and their prestige than to walk in obedience. And that is heartbreaking. Jumping back a little bit, though, in verse 37, it says, even though he, talking about Jesus, had performed so many signs in the presence of the multitude, they did not believe in him. There's just, this caught my eye last night. We had some seniors over and we're going through John, but we're at the beginning, and each of them were reading their Hear Journals. And I love to see a pattern in each different person. One of the guys that's here, his pattern is always that Jesus is the way to God. Through Jesus is salvation. And it's just, you see it over and over again. And that's what God's speaking to him. And to Mulaney, one of the girls, over and over again each day, She recognizes the people that just had the faith of a child, that they didn't have to see all the miracles and they believed anyway. And that's what her journal entries are about. And that's what God is just stirring up in her heart. And so you see these people, some people just believe, like the Samaritan woman. There wasn't even this big, huge thing. And other times God's doing these enormous miracles and people still aren't believing, or maybe they recognize there's something special about them, but they still choose not to follow. The rest of the chapter is just a recap on believing in God. That's heart, doing things with your actions more than your head. He's talking about light and darkness. He's talking about what the last day will be and the coming judgment and eternal life. And we're going to close here with wrapping this entire thing up, that we were created to worship. It's going to cost us something. People will misunderstand us and come against us. And the biggest form of worship is serving and loving others. But God will change our hearts if we do this, from a heart of stone that loves flesh to a heart that loves kingdom work. And so I just challenge you to start thinking about and asking God in prayer where you can serve, where you can make a difference, and also if you're giving God your best or if He's getting your leftovers. We will see you next week in chapter 13, and I'll see you then. Happy reading.